Welcome back. In this section, we're continuing on with React Router. There are a few additional topics we have yet to cover that are very useful and very important. Things like URL parameters, which we'll cover in this video, redirects, setting up 404 pages. There's a lot to talk about. So we're going to begin with parameters in our routes. So to begin, I have a very simple component called food.js, and all that I'm doing is using a nice image API from unsplash.com. You put some string at the end, which I'm using a prop for, but if I put giraffe here, we'll see a giraffe image. So whatever that prop is going to be used to generate that image. So the prop is called name. And then I'm just displaying the name in an H1, adding the image with the URL I constructed here, and then setting an alt attribute with the name. So it just says giraffe or kale or whatever it is. And then in my app.js, I have a single food component with name set to kale. This is what we see. So if I wanted to have multiple types of foods, obviously I could do this. Name kale, let's do chicken, and then banana. And then they all show up at the same time. It's not great, but it works. But if instead we wanted to use routes so that I could visit food/kale and see kale, food/chicken and see chicken, I could manually set up routes that would look like this here, where for each route, we define /food/some type of food, and then we manually pass in prop name equals tacos, if the route is tacos, salad, if the route has salad. So that would look like this. I've imported routes in my index.js. I've wrapped it with my app component with browser router, same standard setup. So path would be /food/kale, and then render will pass in to our food component name equals kale. So you can see where I'm going with this. It's not a very good setup for many reasons. The first is that we have a lot of duplicated code. This is extremely similar. We're following a pattern here. So if I just fill this out quickly, chicken, and then what I do, banana. Let's do pineapple this time. Okay, so I have my routes, and if I go, I don't have a root route specified, but if I go to /food/pineapple, I see pineapple. My image loads. It's not the fastest thing on earth, but it's working. If I go to kale, I see kale. If I wanted this to have a whole bunch of different foods, this would be a horrible approach because I would have to hard code every single one in. I would have to duplicate hundreds and hundreds of these routes just to have coverage of most of the common foods. It's not a good way of structuring our app. It's not a good pattern. So instead, what I could do is define a route that just matched a more general pattern, /food/something else, which I can't spell. Now this isn't going to work because this will literally match /food/something else. Instead, I can define a pattern /food/:, and then name or type or something like that. I'll go with name. And that colon is very important. That is how we make a URL parameter. It's like a variable. So it will match /food/something else that comes afterwards. So I'm going to refactor what I have right now, just delete and start over. So a new route, path is going to be /: name. And for now, we'll render a food where name is hard-coded to egg. Okay, so let's test it out. If I go to /food/kale, apparently that is our egg image. Okay, there we go. That's a little better. If I go to /food/tomato, I see the same thing with an egg, and so on. So this can be anything. And since we're not using this, we're just seeing egg photos every time. Now, as far as the matching, if I add another slash in there, like /hello, it still is matching. So the same rules apply, where if we want to be exact, we'll specify exact. So now we'll only match when we have /food/something else without something afterwards. So this doesn't match anymore, but if I go to /food/taco, it does match. So now the question is, how do I get access to whatever this value is? Because I would like to use it instead of my food component rather than hard coding egg every time. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with eggs. They're very versatile food, but we don't need to display them every time. So if we go to the router documentation, scroll down, there's this little section about route props. and it says that all three render methods, so there are three different ways of specifying what component should render. We've only talked about component and render. There's another one called children, but all three of them will be passed the same three route props: match, location, and history. So let me show you what that looks like. It's saying that this render, this function we're defining in here, is going to automatically be passed some route information, three props. So I'm going to add in, this can be called anything. I'm going to call it route props and save. And then I'm going to come over here and pass it down to my food component. And let's just call it stuff. Stuff equals route props. And then we'll take a look at what is inside of stuff. So go back to my app, refresh the page, and if I go to my React Dev Tools, we'll take a moment to get there. We'll go to our food component. You'll see we have name is set to egg, and stuff has three pieces of information like the doc said: history, location, and match. So we're not going to worry about location right now or history. We'll talk about them, but we are going to worry about match. So match contains information about this path and the route that actually was matched. So things like /food/:name, that was the path we matched in the route. And then the actual real URL was food/tacos. But the thing we're going to care about right now is in params. Name is tacos. So it took this :name that we had right here, and it assigned the value to that parameter of tacos. And then if we instead went to /fish, we would see instead that it's set to fish. So we can use that now and pass that down to our component. So if we look in match, params, name is fish. So we have a couple of options. The first one would be to say name instead of egg is route props dot match dot params dot name. So we could pull out the piece of information right here and only pass down that name from the URL under the prop name. And then we don't have to change our component at all. We can just use this.props.name because that's the only thing we're passing down under the term name. And now we're going to /food/fish and we see fish. If we go to /cow, we see a cow picture, and our text also says cow. If I go to /mushroom, we see a mushroom picture, hopefully. Okay, so that's one option, is to extract the piece of information we want and pass it down. But the other thing we can do is just pass down the entire route props. And I like to do it this way, where we extract the three items. So route props is now passed down as three separate props to our food. Now our component is not expecting that. It's looking for a name, and right now it doesn't have a name. So the render is not working exactly how we want. But if we look at our food, we can see there are now three props, and they're not nested inside of one prop anymore. There are three separate props: history, location, and match. And then inside of match, we have params and name is mushroom. So I could change my component around. Instead of this.props.name, I would need to access this.props.match.params.name. But what I would probably do is just up top in render, say const name equals this.props.match.params.name, and then replace all of these with name. And it should work now. Oh, that's a really pretty mushroom. I just saw one of those on a hike the other day. I think it's called a fly agaric. Yeah, it is. Look at me, mushroom expert. Just kidding. It's the one mushroom I could identify. Anyway, so it's working. We could try just another route, /food/corn, and we see corn, or something that is supposed to look like corn. All right, so that was the other option. And you might be wondering, why would you do that? Your component now is only going to work when you pass down those props, and we couldn't use this component anymore if, for example, we weren't using routes and I wanted to go to my app and just hard code a food at the top. So I can't do this anymore. Food name equals chicken, because we're not using name anymore. So it gets freaked out because inside of here, In our food, it's looking for this.props.match.params, but this exact food component doesn't have any of that. It only has a name. So the choice is yours about how you structure the components. It really depends on the use case. While I'm here, I do want to mention there is one alternate syntax. So we've seen how to do this using components, where you pass in a component just like this. Component is food, and this will actually work as is. React Router will automatically pass in to that component as props, the match, location, and history props. So if we refresh, it's still working. If we go back to food/mushroom, we get our mushroom photo. Different mushroom. I don't know which one that is. And you'll see that those props are all there. So they've been passed in as well. And we didn't have to define that function and pass them in one at a time. Instead, React Router takes care of it, history, location, and match. And we've only talked about match, so don't worry about these other two. So that approach works if you are not passing in additional information, additional props, but the moment that you have some other stuff that you want to pass in, like let's say I have some authentication set up and I want to add in a prop called authenticated set to true. Well, I can't do that with component. So instead, I'm going to use render, and then inside of render, do the same thing we've seen where we have the food component. And then I'm going to pass in authenticated as true. And then I'll pass my route params in as well. So if you're trying to add in additional information, additional props, then you can't use that nice shortcut syntax with component. And we'll see lastly that now we should have multiple pieces of information here. We should have authenticated is true, history, location, and match. So just to reiterate, if you're passing in other props, this is the syntax you would need to use, render, and then you pass the route params yourself. Otherwise, you can use the shortcut component syntax. So I'll leave both of these here. Let me duplicate this, comment out the first one. And if you do use render, you have to make sure you pass those props in because right now they're getting lost. They're being passed to this function, but they're not actually being used. So we have to pass them in, whatever we call them, route params, and then here route, or let's do route props. That's actually more descriptive of what they are. And now everything's happy again. Okay, so that is how we can add a single route parameter to our routes. We can make them match more general things where we might have some variable, something that can be dynamic.